E2's down there, right? So, mate. B2 or down there to the left.
Oh, I wouldn't mind a bottle of water. Oh, were they down there?
Yeah, there's let me
There's some. Is some just by the door?
I don't know whether that's yours.
Oh, okay.
2 random empty bottles of water.
I can run or I can monitor the stream. We're broadcasting now, so I can't.
Okay.
You got to grab some muscle mark.
Yeah.
Halfway through, I might get thirsty.
Cool. Just get it from the bottom upstairs. Or is that on the
Reception.
Wicked guys, welcome to your Friday afternoon session. We've got Matthew and Belinda who's going to talk to you about mental wellness. So as you guys know, it's still in the streak, obviously, and we've still got a competition running. Anybody that wants to take pictures and post pictures, you can hashtag IW22 on Instagram or Twitter within the chance to win a load of prizes. I'm not sure what they are. I'm sure I've seen people walking around with keyboards and speakers this week already. Okay, right, so I'll hand you over to these guys who's going to look after you for the next hour and a bit. Okay, see you guys. I'll bring up some.
Cool. Thanks so much for the introduction. And thanks guys for coming and spending some of your Friday afternoon with us. So Matthew and I will tell you a little bit more about like who we are and what we do, but collectively we run a company called Listen Up Therapy, and we offer therapy, mentoring, and meditation and mindfulness as that umbrella company. And today, just so you have like a wee bit of an idea of what we'll cover, we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves and what we do and Matthew's involvement in the music industry. And then we're going to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and anxiety and do some breath work and kind of give some practical tips and tools as well. And then there'll be time for some Q&A at the end. So that's our general run of the day.
So my name's Matthew Benjamin. My DJ name is Bushwhacker. I've been a DJ and music producer for about 32 years or so now. And I've also trained as a psychotherapist in 2017. And I've been working with people with all sorts of anxieties, all sorts of presenting issues, and quite a lot of young people as well, actually, for several years now. I'm also working on a really big music project which incorporates my own productions with healing tones, binaural beats, and positive affirmations to create functional music for well-being. So I'm combining the knowledge that I have as a psychotherapist with my musical experience to work on something that I know will be able to help people in different ways. And I formed Listen Up Therapy with Belinda a couple of years ago. It's something we've been talking about for a long time. We're growing this now. We're working with more and more people and seeing if our life experiences can somehow help them.
Cool. And so my name's Belinda. I've done like so many different careers in my life. So if anyone feels like they don't always know exactly what they're doing, it's okay. You could sometimes do lots of different things and then they all seem to join up halfway through your life somehow. So most of my work now, I do mentoring people, helping them coming over self-limiting beliefs or subconscious patterns that are kind of driving their life and stopping them from really reaching their full potential. I've also done a lot of training as a meditation teacher, going to India and all different places around the world. That's been for the last 10 years or so. And I really love electronic music, like I know so many people do, but spent all my younger years and even up till now going out, and I absolutely love it. So I really wanted to find a way that I could like blend having electronic music and meditation together. So I do a lot of wellness at festivals, kind of combining those worlds. So that's just a little bit of our background, a little bit about what we do, just to give some context for everything else that we're going to be sharing today. So for the first part, we are going to be talking about imposter syndrome. And interestingly enough, this is something that not every single person experiences, but when you experience it yourself, you do feel like you're the only person that it's happening to. So I was just sharing, like, I've done a whole bunch of different careers. So every time I learn something and do something in a new space, I always have this feeling of like, oh, well, I'm just new in this space and maybe I don't know as much of other people. So this is something I've had to deal with. Matthew's dealt with, you know, as a DJ, as a music producer. So it's not like we're coming and talking about this thing that we actually haven't had to go through in life. So we're going to be sharing about our experiences and some of the things that have helped us move through them. And hopefully by sharing our stories, there'll be some benefit to you as well. So we'll go into, like, you know, what is imposter syndrome? So as I was saying, interestingly enough, not everyone experiences it, but you think, yeah, you're the only one that does. So some people did some research on this. They were like, how come sometimes people are so smart and talented and they've got all this experience and they've done all this study, and yet inside they're like crippled with self-doubt and think that they're not good enough at what they're doing? And it was really interesting, this study they did in the 70s, because they classified some of the different types of imposter syndrome. And we want to share them with you because you might be able to see which one resonates more, or maybe none of them resonate. But it's just an interesting talking point to kind of go through some of these.
Yeah, and these are quite broad, so they can cross over as well. But for example, with the perfectionist, they feel they must do everything right, and anything less means that they don't know what they're doing. I'm thinking of experiences that I've had working with other people. That's been very prevalent in my music career. I'm thinking about how even when something is good enough and it is right, I mean, although it's very subjective with music, there's that feeling, oh no, it's not enough, it's not good enough, it's not as good as their thing, it's not as good as what's expected of me. And you know, that message, as we'll look at a little bit later, can come from a lot earlier on in life.
There's then the expert, I think I quite kind of associate with this, like thinking you need to know absolutely everything before you start. And as someone who has done a lot of different courses and a lot of different studies, this can be really crippling, because even for you guys studying now, you're constantly around teachers and tutors and people that are experts in their field. And so if you're comparing yourself to them, you can be like, wow, I'm doing this amazing course, but sometimes I feel like I don't know anything. But compared to the average person on the street, you know loads, and you can share loads, and you can do a lot with what you have. So this is sometimes a trap that then we can kind of fall into, of having a bit of self-doubt. There's always going to be people that know more than us, but really just tuning into like what you have to share is valuable.
Welcome to all the latecomers. You're welcome. Then there's the soloist. The soloist. I mean, I kind of laugh with Belinda about this, because I often fall into this life position, if you like. The soloists, they have to do everything on their own for it to count. They think if I didn't do it myself, I'm not truly good at it. And you know, there'll be times when I'll turn around to Belinda and say, Matthew Benjamin did it. Matthew Benjamin did it. And you know, that actually, you know, the joke for that came from, you know, when I was at primary school, and like, you know, if I'd done something wrong, and like when you were 5 years old, the others would be like, Matthew Benjamin did it, you know. And so I kind of got stuck with this thing. I have to do it on my own, and it has to be good enough on my own for it to be accepted, and then I have to let it be known that I've done it on my own. And that's based on an imposter syndrome, that it's not good enough.
The other big trap of this one, if you guys ever do group work together and the group gets an award, sometimes we can be like, oh, it was everyone else in the group was really good, and you know, they were more deserving than me. So if you're ever doing group work, always owning your partner, especially if it does really well, gets an accolade, not just thinking, oh, it's the other people that did it and not me. Yeah, and then these last two are kind of similar. If you guys are working with music, for example, with a natural genius, maybe some things come to you so naturally, like, you know, some people can just play music by ear, they don't need to read it, but perhaps the production part is more challenging and you're like, oh, wow, it's not just coming to me like that. I have to learn it. And even that comparison, when you have been like so natural at something and then having to learn something else, we can put ourselves down. So of course, we're not going to be amazing at everything in life. That's why we come to places like this to learn and perfect our skills. And we don't have to be, you know, perfect at the first week. And I know loads of people that if they try something and they're not good at it, if they don't cotton on in the first week, they just give it up. But it's just blocking them from doing so many really cool things in life. So often it is worth just persevering with that and getting the skills. Especially now, I think having a balanced skill set's more important than ever. So if we just focus on what we're naturally good at, not the other stuff, it's not as great for our career.
The natural genius kind of that description kind of falls into the last one in many ways as well. And, you know, that sense that you get where if you don't nail it first time, that you're just not going to bother trying again, that like, oh, well, this is obviously not for me, or, you know, I'll leave it to someone else, or I'm shit. You know, and these messages that we kind of label ourselves with for not getting it right first time, you know.
Yeah, so maybe you guys see yourself in some of these, maybe not. It's not always about like labels, but it's just about creating a bit of a bridge for what we're talking about today as we go further on in the presentation. Yeah, I mean, the key point we want to have here as well is this imposter syndrome can create a bit of a vicious circle sometimes. If you're coming to do something and you doubt yourself, sometimes we think that doubt showing up because I'm not good enough for the task. And the doubt's just showing up because we get nervous and anxious before doing things that mean something to us, you know. So before a concert or before any kind of, you know, musical presentation or, you know, even talking, it's natural that we feel a bit anxious and a little bit of self-doubt. As we said, we experience imposter syndrome. The trick there is mistaking that natural anxiety for feeling I'm not up to the task. And that happens a lot, especially when we're starting out with things younger in life.
Sure, and I'm thinking of that in a performing context as well. I'm thinking about you know, how my process would be with gigs and DJing for a while. And if I did one gig that wasn't very good, I'd be, you know, pretty depressed about it. But if I did two in a row, that was it. I was going to give up. I was going to retire, sell my records. It was just over, you know. And then the third gig would be really good, and I'd be like, yeah, everything's amazing again. So it's how, you know, how does what you're doing affect what you think you can do and why? And that's really what we're exploring.
Yeah, there's always going to be ups and downs on everyone's journey. So now we'll go a bit more into kind of like, you know, the therapy side of like, where does this come from? Because we spoke about in the first slide, not always everyone experiences imposter syndrome. You may have some friends that just feel like they're just so confident all the time and you're feeling a little bit anxious. So we're going to go into that a little bit deeper now.
So just to lay it out, having this conversation isn't necessarily a one conversation fixes all solution. You know, this is just highlighting some of what we as human beings have to deal with in terms of growth. And, you know, in childhood, verbal or non-verbal cues that lead us to believe I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I'm inadequate, doesn't mean that you had bad parents. It doesn't mean that they did anything wrong. But what it indicates is that there was something in your needs that wasn't getting met somehow, right? It might not have been to do with what was being said. It might be more to do with what was being felt. We don't always know what our caregivers or our parents were going through while they were trying to do their best for us. But it, you know, regardless of whether, you know, you're pointing the finger, you're blaming or not, our early environmental upbringing can affect us a lot in terms of whether we feel good enough, whether and that doesn't just apply to being at home. it can apply to what's going on, at school when we're young as well. But it's really about what support was available to you that was authentic, genuine support as well. And so if that wasn't readily available to you, there's a lot more of a chance that you might have feelings of inadequacy. And there's also a lot of competition. There's a sort of sibling rivalry that can play into it. There's a lot of favoritism that can play into it if you feel like that's been experienced. Or there can be a jealousy, like if you've got I don't know, a bigger or a little brother or a little sister, when you're that small, they're a threat to your existence. And when you're that small, it's life or death if you're not getting all the attention from your caregivers. And all of this can play into how you might feel about not being good enough or being unlovable. I mean, I'll give you one example for me of where this came from for me is that when I was 5 years old, my mum had my second sister, and she had to have an operation. She had postnatal depression. And because of the operation she had, she wasn't able to pick me up or give me a hug for about 3 months after my second sister was born. To me, that was life or death, because my mum didn't want me anymore. She had to physically push me away. So I couldn't get what I needed at that time. And it's taken a long time for me to work through that. So that's my example. That's a personal example, but there can be a million reasons, from the smallest to the biggest, why that might be happening. And the coping mechanisms that we develop as a child, which serve us as a child, get carried through to when we become young adults and then older adults, and they no longer work, they no longer serve us. So the way that we used coping mechanisms when we were very young, our bodies still feel that. Our bodies and our minds still want to do that. They still want to go into that, it's easier for me to go and hide. It's easier for me to say I'm not good enough and just like resign myself to that fact, or I need to be perfect to get by. And that might have seemed like it was the case when you were very small, but when you're older, it's not. And a lot of therapy is about working through these self-limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of my own personal examples where my parents worked really, really hard. So they were trying to provide as best for us as possible, but it meant they weren't always around. And so one of my things was actually trying to get attention through like either getting good grades in school. My brother was different. He'd just get in trouble at school. But, our parents had such good intentions for us. They wanted to earn a good living and provide for us. But as kids, we were like subconsciously not really getting the attention that we felt we needed. And so that's led to us having a bit of self-doubt like later in life, because we're like, oh, we're doing all these things and, mum and dad aren't always looking at us. So things that can then show up are the overworking that I mentioned. That's what sometimes I experience, because I'm like, wow, I need to keep, doing my best, because if I'm not working really hard, someone's going to think that I'm lazy or not good enough, and that I'm going to be exposed. We get these like paranoid fantasies of things that are never actually going to happen, but go on in our head. And then other things just to be aware of with the overthinking is any kind of form of addiction, whether that's like with social media or drugs and alcohol. It's all ultimately trying to fill like a hole that we have inside of ourselves. So that's something to be aware of as well. And there are other ways to fill that hole, which we're going to look at later in the presentation. So now that we've kind of spoken about, what it is and why it happens, we're going to have a look at a few ways to.
But before we do, if any of you think you might have experienced any of those kinds of imposter syndrome, can you just raise your hands? No, you're in the right room then. Brilliant. Cool.
Okay, so we'll look at a few more examples. So how do we move through it? One is actually having like the self-belief in ourselves. And one story I want to share that I was really moved by was that it was at a kind of a therapeutic training. So I've told you I've done lots of different trainings. And this guy came up on stage and he was talking to the facilitator, and he's like, I'm having an issue. I feel like I'm a phony in my work. And he's like, well, what are you doing for your work? And he was a counselor. And he's like, well, how do you feel like you're being a phony when you're doing your counseling work? Because I know you're actually helping a lot of people. And so this man, he was so sweet. He was sitting there and he's like, well, sometimes when the person comes in and they tell me their problem, I don't know how to answer straight away. I don't know what advice I should give them. So I actually just sit and sometimes leave a few minutes pause. And then whatever comes into my head, then that's what I share. And you could feel like everyone else in the room was like, well, that's kind of really cool that you just listen to yourself. But he was doubting his intuition so much. He was thinking, I haven't, or I can't recall like all the theory from my counseling qualification. But he had this amazing intuition. He was sitting and pausing and being with the person. And then whatever was coming to mind, he was sharing. It's like, that is the best thing ever, using our innate intelligence. And so sometimes this imposter syndrome comes up because we value education or information that comes from outside of us more than the information that comes from inside of us. So as creative people, because I'm sure you're all creative being at this institution, like the information that comes from inside of you is so valuable and often even carries more weight than the things that you're learning on the outside. So, you know, some people are just like, if I don't have all these letters after my name, who am I to speak about this? But our inner intuition, our creativity, our life experience is really, really valuable. So don't ever forget that in any of the projects that you're doing and any of the things that you're involved in.
Yeah. I was just thinking about what Belinda just shared with you, and just thinking about my work as well as a therapist, and how there can be moments quite regularly where I'm sitting in the chair and I'm thinking, who am I to be sitting here listening to you show me your vulnerability and your intimacy and you know the deepest secrets that you're holding on to that you need to explore, and who am I to be sitting here, you know? And it can be difficult to deal with those feelings. But what is interesting about that is that a lot of the work that I do with people and the work that I've been taught is it's not about pushing the feelings down or about pushing them away. It's about being able to sit with them, being able to be with those feelings, because like all things, they will pass. And when we are feeling that way, it's so hard to even believe that we'll ever not feel that way, you know? I struggle with accepting that I'm worthy and deserving of any accolades, and that might be something that some of you resonate with. I'm thinking about a couple of things actually. I'm thinking about, I trained as a psychotherapist. I did 3 years and had to do lots of exams and lots of essays, and it was very academic. And I've been a DJ since I was 16. I left school with a few GCSEs at 16. I didn't do any further education. I hadn't written anything for years, let alone an essay. And suddenly I was in this environment where I was learning all this really heavy stuff with long words, and you know, but I passed all my exams. And then in the third year, it was like the second exam for the masters, and I got my result when I was at home, and I got a dissertation. I got
A high distinction.
A high distinction for this exam. And you know, I cried for probably a couple of hours, but I could no longer deny that I was worthy and deserving of an accolade. You know, I'd done 3-4 of these essays each year, passed them all, and then got this result, which doesn't make me a great therapist. That's not what I'm saying, but I could no longer deny that I'm not worthy or deserving of these accolades. I can do it. And, you know, I had this massive emotional kind of outpouring. But, you know, with imposter syndrome, that, you know, it doesn't always last. And my father was a professor of surgery, and he was the head of the medical school at King's College. And, you know, he'd written thousands of you know, had done thousands of lectures and, you know, had lots of papers published and won awards, and, you know, he practices medical law now. And he said to me, he said, even now, he said, you know, they call me up to do these, you know, these tribunals for medical law. And I think to myself, why are they calling me? Who am I to like sit up there and give them my opinion? Like, oh, what do I know? You know, and, you know, he kind of got to the top of his career. So, you know, it's not always about your qualifications and having the letters after your name. It is about the self-belief and what that means, and knowing that people at the very top of their game, and if you Google any of this about actors, about musicians that also suffer from self-belief and imposter syndrome issues, there's a lot of very, very successful, famous people that are very outgoing and very public that are absolutely rife with this, you know?
Yeah, and it really is about learning how to live with it, because I know sometimes even with the work I do with people, if they have a breakthrough, they're like, yes, I'm like cured forever and I feel really self-confident, but life always has waves and ups and downs. And so when we, like we said, we still experience imposter syndrome, but what we'll share next are like some of the tools that help us to kind of live with it and be a bit more compassionate towards ourselves and not have that aspect of us kind of like take over and steal the moments of our life that we should be really enjoying. So self-compassion is a big one.
Yeah, I mean, you hear that sort of cliched saying of like, you can't love anybody else without being able to love yourself. And so many people cringe and hate that. And like, what do you mean by that? Why can't I? And, you know, why can't I? But, you know, it's like we are our worst critic. And, you know, it's like with creative block, with relationships, with bonding, with all sorts of life issues, you know, when we have this sense of ourselves, you know, we can be really hard on ourselves, really harsh on ourselves. And, you know, for me, it was like, I didn't actually realize that I did any work until 20 years of people saying, you work so hard. And I was thinking, what are you talking about? You know, I'm lazy. I don't, you know, I don't do anything, you know. What would you do if someone had, you know, if someone had made a mistake, you know, what would you do? Would you go and have a go at them, or would you, you know, would you probably, you'd give them some comfort and reassurance rather than make them feel bad? What is it about that we find so difficult about doing to ourselves? What is it that stops us, that blocks us from being able to show some compassion to ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, I'm so guilty of that. If you came to me about something, I'd definitely say something nice to you, but to myself, it's just like, oh, that was so stupid. And how could I do that? And I'm never going to do this again. And the way we speak to ourselves, I think if we actually said it out loud, would be quite disturbing to hear sometimes, and pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
Okay, so we're going to do this with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we just want to do an exercise. If you don't want to follow along, you can just sit in your chair. It's all consensual, but just to kind of put into practice speaking with ourselves a little bit about all the things that we've been sharing.
So yeah, just give yourself a minute to settle, and then keep your eyes open, close your eyes, whatever you want to do. Just relax in your seat for a moment and think about a time where you can remember feeling these feelings, feeling what we're calling imposter syndrome, feeling less than or not good enough or not worthy, and just sit with that for a minute and notice what's going on in your body. Notice what part of your body you might feel that in. If you feel anything, you may feel nothing. Just notice it and see what comes up, see what arises.
Oh, okay. So just feeling into that part of you that might feel some self-doubt, that might be telling you that you're not enough. And just listening to what it might say to you right now. And then maybe seeing what that part actually needs, what it needs to hear. And just being compassionate to that part of yourself, that part that might be mean to you, but maybe that part's actually just really scared or afraid, doesn't know what's going on.
How old is that part of you? How old is that part of you that's feeling those feelings? And what does that part of you need, and how would you comfort a friend that might be feeling that way? How might you comfort yourself? How might you be kind to yourself?
Often this part of us, it is a part that's been with us since we were a small child, so it can feel like a younger part. Just letting it know that it's okay and accepted, and that it doesn't need to say those things anymore. Just feeling that self-compassion to that little part of you.
And so that's just a very, very short experiment, just to put you in tune a little bit with what it feels like, because our bodies store these feelings. It's not just what's going on in our mind. Our mind takes us into these places of, I'm not good enough, I can't do it, I'm a fraud, I'm a phony. But it's what we are actually experiencing in our body, which we often don't pay any attention to, that needs the attention, because those are the feelings that have been stored and that stay there and that are not necessarily representative of what you can or can't do, or what your beliefs are about yourself. So really, there's so much that we don't pay attention to. We've got three brains. We've got this brain, we've got the heart brain, and we've got the gut brain. And they talk about, listen to your heart, gut instinct, thinking, and they're all connected, and they tell us things, they give us signals.
So often it is that self-doubt is the scared little part inside of us. So even though it can be quite mean and fiery, it's really just saying, actually, I don't need you to kind of be here in this situation with me, telling me I'm not worthy. That's like some bad advice. If you had a friend that was giving you bad advice all the time, after a while, you'd be like, okay, thanks for the advice. I'm not going to keep taking it. So if you keep getting this voice coming up inside of you, saying things about self-doubt or that you are an imposter, it's starting to recognize, okay, that's just that little part of me that's kind of stuck, that's giving some bad advice, and I'm just not going to take that advice anymore because my adult part knows better. Okay. So this kind of leads us into anxiety quite well, doesn't it, Matthew? Part of imposter syndrome does bring up anxiety because we get ourselves in these what if cycles. The imposter's like, well, what if this isn't good enough, or what if they don't like it, or what if people laugh, or what if, it can go on and on and on, which is really, really unhealthy for us. And where's our analogy here? I want to go to here. It's kind of what if cycles get us into this overthinking loop, like this little boy here who is in knee-deep water, but the overthinking is making him feel like he's drowning. And then the mum's just like, you just need to stand up and you're okay. So this is kind of what the overthinking can be like for us. We're in this like, what if this is going to happen? And what if they don't like it? And what if this person says this? And half the time, none of those things are actually going to happen, but we feel like we're drowning.
Yeah, the catastrophizing, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, it's going to, I'm going to crash, it's going to fail, I'm going to, all of this stuff. And, so often the things that we catastrophize about that are linked to our anxiety end up not meaning anything.
So when we're in a state like that with the overthinking, there's like some technical terms here. We call it like a window of tolerance. So window of tolerance is where we're feeling calm, grounded. If something stressful happens in your day, you're like, I've got this is what I'm going to do. Like, you feel like you can handle everything. So the two states either side, if we were shutting down and had lower energy, we'd be going into like a depressed state where someone can be telling you like an emergency is happening and you're like, you don't have any energy. And then anxiety is obviously the opposite. So we were just looking at like the overacting mind and the boy in the water. And so there's almost like too much energy there. So if someone does come and say like, oh, it's an emergency situation, we're about to do our gig and something's not working, you're kind of like, you're so anxious, you don't know what to do. You can't actually respond in the situation. So what we're going to do in the next part of this session is do a little bit of breath work and exercises that help with this anxiety, because when you're in that thought loop of like, what if, you're not in that window of tolerance where you can actually make a good decision. You're in this state where you're like, I don't know what to do. And when you're stuck there, it just gets more and more stressful, doesn't it? So from there, knowing how to drop into this state where it's like, okay, I need to get myself more in this window of tolerance, so I'm grounded, so my mind can actually think about creating a solution or, a next step, rather than just being stuck in my mind. Okay, so we're going to do a few little exercises together now. I'm actually going to talk you through some of the techniques so you understand how and why they work, because I'm just a huge proponent for when we actually understand why we're doing something, it usually has a lot more benefits. So I'm going to show you like 3 little techniques, and we're going to do them together at the end in a really short meditation. The first one is called a progressive muscle relaxation. So when we're anxious, we've got a lot of energy, right? We're feeling a bit frizzy, we're feeling frantic. And if someone just says, sit and do a meditation, you are so far from that frequency. It's just not really going to happen. So doing something like a progressive muscle relaxation actually helps you get rid of some of that pent up energy, so then that you're able to actually sit and do some of the breathing we're going to do. So the idea behind this, if someone tells you just to relax, if you're stressed and someone tells you to relax, you're like, just sitting there, you can't just relax. The best way to relax is actually to create some tension first, and then the relaxation happens. So we'll do this now, just using our fists. So both of your hands make into tight fists. You can just have them on your lap, but I'll raise mine a little bit higher so you can see. And just breathing normally, but squeeze the fists really hard. So just make them nice and tight. And then take a deep breath in, squeeze them a little bit tighter. And then one more deep breath, and hold the breath just for a minute. And then breathe out and open the hands. So it was like super short, but your hands, you probably feel like a slight natural relaxation sensation happening in them. So that's what we're going to do in a little bit of a meditation practice. It's kind of like the stress ball thing people had in the 80s, which you guys might be too young for, but people used to like sit at their desk and hold on to this thing. But it does help for anxiety because it's helping to move some of that like tension out of our body, and we get the natural relaxation that happens afterwards. And I like this because you can do it anywhere and nobody really knows what you're doing. So if you felt stressed on a bus or the tube or at work, you can just squeeze your hands and then relax them. And once you do that a couple of times, your body will really start to slow down. So that's the first technique that we'll do together. The second one that we'll do is called, or I call a waterfall breath, which sounds relaxing just looking at the waterfall. But the idea behind this one is we breathe in, and as we breathe out, you just imagine all your energy going down as you exhale. So you're like almost doing a body scan from your head down towards the pelvis. And this is really helpful because when we're in our head, obviously that's where all the energy is. And so we're just more and more and more in our head and our thoughts. So when we do this breath, which some people call the waterfall breath, because you can just imagine like, the water's washing over me and everything's going down. And you start to pull away some of the energy from your head, which is busy with all these thoughts. And again, just doing this a couple of times really helps you come more into a grounded state where you're going to be able to make better decisions when then you're all frantic and up here. And again, I love this technique because you can do it anywhere. Nobody has any idea what you're doing. So these for me are always the best anxiety breath works. There are lots of other ones you can do, but sometimes you have to like, I don't know, touch your face and do other things. These you can all do like really secretively. Nobody knows what you're doing. And then the last one, which is super simple, but I want to explain to you why it works so that it may have more value for you. Because a lot of people have heard about, breathe into your belly breathing. It's like, okay, great. So what? It does actually shift your whole nervous system when you breathe into your belly. So when we're stressed, you've probably heard about the fight and flight system. So the ancient thing of like, if there was the tiger, we're running away and we're in that stress state. When you're running from the tiger, is your belly going to be nice and soft and relaxed? No. Your abs are like in, you're like running. And so when we don't breathe into our belly and when we're just breathing into our chest, it's sending a signal to our body that we're actually in the stress state. When you breathe into the belly and relax it, your body's like, we're not running from a tiger. We're good. We're okay. But most of us don't actually breathe into our belly. So as I said, it sounds really simple, but when you do this, you actually switch nervous system response into the rest and digest. So, and again, you can do this anytime. You can do it on its own. I love putting on a track because we'll do that together. Breathe into the belly for a few minutes. And honestly, so many of my clients, just from doing this exercise, they're always like, Belinda, I did the belly breathing. It really helped with my anxiety the other day. So we don't have to have like, huge, big things to do. Sometimes it's these really, really simple things and they get us back into that bandwidth of the window of tolerance. And then you're like, okay, I've got this. No more what ifs. I'm just going to be in the moment and go with the next steps.
And just thinking as well, as I listened to Belinda tell you about these breathing exercises, that in 2015, I was away on a course, it's called a health thing, and one of the lectures was on breathing, and I was really dismissive of it. I was like, what do you mean you're going to teach us how to breathe? I know how to breathe. If I didn't know how to breathe, I wouldn't be alive, would I? And this is all ridiculous. But we don't realize that we don't tap into the power of our breath. If you're in intense concentration, or if you're in various different headspaces and mental states, often your breathing's really shallow, often your breathing's really fast. We're not taking long, deep breaths. We're not using the oxygen. We're not giving our body what we can give it, which is free and the most powerful tool. So it really is a lot more profound than I ever believed.
Yeah, this is also really good for any like pre-gig anxiety or like before an exam or before anything you've got coming up, because we do get asked a lot about that as well, because people do feel really anxious before performing. And yeah, doing exercises like this can just help you really ground in and then be in your zone for whatever's coming next. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to put all these together. We'll start with the fist. So just sitting comfortably, you don't have to change your posture, but you may like to have your feet on the floor if that feels kind of more grounding for you. And then if you want, closing down your eyes, you don't have to, whatever feels comfortable for you. And just starting with the palms open on your lap. And so just noticing the sensation of your hands, feeling them just coming a little bit more into the body. And then taking a deep breath in and slowly curling the hands to start to make a fist. And continue breathing normally. And if you can, relax your jaw a little bit and imagine that any tension that you were feeling in your jaw is running down through your arms and into the hands. So maybe even just wriggling the jaw a little bit because we hold a lot of tension there. And every time you breathe in, just tensing the hands a little bit more. And then taking in a deep breath, squeeze the hands and hold the breath just for a moment or two. And then relax it out, deep exhale, and open the hands out. Okay, keeping the eyes closed. We're going to do this again, just having a little rest, noticing how your body feels. And then taking a deep breath in and start to curl the hands slowly into a fist, creating some tension in the hands. And again, giving the jaw a little wriggle and even your shoulders. Try to relax the shoulders and imagine any tension that was there is flowing down through your arms and into the hands. So there is this feeling of the tension melting away from the jaw and the shoulders down into the hands. Keeping a really nice tight pressure in the fists. And then a really deep breath in and hold the breath. And exhale, let go, breathing it out. And we'll just do this one more time, make it really good. Deep breath in, clenching the hands into the fists, squeezing tight, relaxing the jaw, squeeze as tight as you can. And then a deep breath in and exhaling, letting go. Breath in and bringing your attention to the top of the head. And then as you exhale, imagine all of the energy coming down. And every time you breathe in, having your attention at the top of the head. And as you exhale, imagine all the energy coming down like a waterfall. And as you exhale, exhale as slow as you can. And just having this feeling of water washing over you.
more poignant even now than ever before, because having had a couple of years where the music industry, or at least the live event industry, but music has been the last on the list of vocations, if you like, to surface again. That's brought a huge amount of insecurities with people, from everyone, from people who work behind the bars to promoters to performers, musicians, engineers, tour managers, roadies, right across the board. I suppose in terms of what you're striving for, if you're talking about the creative side of that, it can be really difficult when you're thinking about wanting it to be a job, for that sometimes not to affect your creativity. My experience was that I thought of it as a passion, and it became a job. I didn't think this is going to be my job. I'm going to get a job doing this. But in terms of the actual, I mean, it depends what you do. Do you make music? Yeah, you're sound engineering. I mean, it's a trade that takes a lot of work, a lot of patience, a lot of hours, not even just of training, but of experience more than anything else. And I'm thinking back to, for me, I worked up to 80 hours a week, reading manuals, making tea and wiring plugs, and going to the shop for people, not getting paid for a long time before, it turned into a paid job. But, I learned a lot in those days, and it was difficult. There's no doubt about it. It can be difficult. If you really, really want to do this and you're really passionate about it and you stay focused, and this is what you want, you'll get there with it. But it's it can be quite daunting. There are a lot of people going for the same jobs. What do you think?
Yeah, it's also, I think you were saying it because there's still a bit of a stigma. I wasn't sure about that because I think that's quite company dependent, because some companies, like we talk to Beatport and a lot of other big music companies a lot, some of them are trying to normalize, if you have a tummy bug, you ring in and you're like, I'm sick, I can't come in. And that they found a lot of people were ringing in and saying, I had a tummy bug, but they really needed a mental health day. So part of that, I guess, is about the company culture that you eventually work with. There are companies that are starting to be more open and have mental health first aiders, which is something that we really recommend. And then I guess it is coming up with a plan with them, saying, this is what I'm doing for my own mental wellness. But sometimes, I do need a day off. And I think that would be something quite bespoke. But there are companies in the music industry that are starting to want to unstigmatize it, so people aren't ringing up saying I've got a tummy bug when they're at home with a mental health issue. So maybe it's also about researching those companies, because they are starting to exist. I'm not saying it's everywhere, but there's been a lot of panels in the music industry that we've been at or been a part to. And now people are like, okay, so what are you doing about it? So I think there is a pressure there for people to not just talk about it, but actually make it available in the workspace.
Yeah, and there are some really good people out there, like Help Musicians UK, and people that are available 24/7 to talk to in a professional context about these things as well. It's not always, oh, you need to go and pay for therapy, but the stigma, that's, I think it's changing. It's taking some time, but it is changing, that it's becoming more widely accepted and embraced. And as Belinda said, it's like, there's been a lot of talks in the last sort of 5-10 years about mental health in these industries. Now it is more a time of action rather than just talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of burnout happens, yeah, because of imposter syndrome, that thing of like, I need to keep working or I'm not going to be good enough, and overworking. And it is, yeah, taking like care of ourselves. I've had burnout, I think, like 3 times. In one of my many jobs, I worked at an investment bank, and like you just don't, it was just work and party, and people would sleep at the office. It was the worst health environment ever. And it's about seeing it as a long-term game, I guess. And that's why it's really got a lot of music courses. They actually teach meditation, mindfulness, self-care. Like we've got a couple of friends that teach music production as well as what you guys are doing, because it's something you need to start doing now. Because I think what happened more in Matthew's generation was artists would just like completely burn out. And now if you want to be in this as a long-term career, it's like from day one, really like taking care of yourself, which I think you're going to be talking a bit more about in your other session. But it is like, yeah, doing the meditation, mindfulness, and also I guess having a sense, it depends who your peers are about what's expected of you. Are you like going above and beyond because you think that's necessary, or is it because of imposter syndrome? You know, in different roles, they either have, you know, KPIs, I don't know what it's called in music, but you know kind of a bit about what you should be doing. And I guess if people are asking too much of you, it's also feeling confident enough to have that conversation of like expressing your needs and being like, wow, I'm having to do like 100 hours to get this thing done, or I feel this was my role and I'm having to do too much. So it's definitely a balance. And this is where a lot of our personal growth comes in, because when you're starting out in any job, in any industry, you always want to prove yourself. So you're always in there a lot. And then you're like, oh shit, I've kind of set this benchmark now where they know like Sarah is going to be there 100 hours a week. So it's a lot about boundaries. It's a lot about your self-care as well. So that's like quite, you know, a lot of different layers. But if it is the imposter syndrome, they're the people that are burning out because they don't believe anything they do is good enough. They keep going.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I did a talk at Berkeley Music campus in Valencia at the end of last year. And the question that was most asked by their students on their degrees was, how do I, how do I pause from overworking? Because like, I feel like I have to overwork to get anywhere, to really like progress and do well in this. So, but even something as simple as the breathing exercises that Belinda just shared with you, self-care is so important. It's so important to alleviate burnout, and we don't do it. We do not do enough of it. We just get lost, that you can be, I don't know, sitting at a computer screen and 5 hours later you're still there, and how much have you actually done? Whereas where you are taking regular 5-minute, 10-minute breaks, you can get a lot more done. I mean, I'm thinking of there's a thing called a Pomodoro timer, which I used for a while, which was great, which made me work only on one focus for X amount of time and then pause, so that the goal of that was, okay, don't go on Facebook, get distracted, answer emails, whatever. This is what you're doing. You're mixing a track, you're engineering a track, you're recording a mix. That's what you're doing in this time, and then pause. But the self-care, it's so important. The getting out in nature, the getting away from the same 4 walls as often as you can, just to have little breaks. And we don't do it enough. We really don't.
Yeah, immersive wellness is a big trend coming through in the wellness world. So rather than like, oh, let's work our asses off and then we're just so dead and then we need to go away on a 2-week retreat, which is even what people do in music production for albums, right? And it's like, let's just, there are some people now that are starting to be like, okay, let's incorporate a little bit of wellness, a little bit of breathing into everything they're doing, so that they're not feeling like so burnt out. It is amazing just getting away from a screen or doing one of these breathing techniques that helps. And there are times where we have those really crazy deadlines and we do need to work really hard. And then it's just making sure we get time off in between those.
So I played beats many years ago, and I kind of feel anxious and stressed as you get on and finish it. It's a bit of the perfectionist, it's a bit of well, yeah, it's just, so I'm trying to like overcome that still, that kind of go back. Some of the stuff, like, yeah, still figuring out, can't sit there.
What's stopping you?
It's thinking very high of myself, thinking, oh, I've got to get this done in a certain standard. It's all these things.
Mm.
I agree with him. Because I have been getting stressed lately after after a few rocky weeks of COVID. And what's putting me off is the brain fog that just keeps going. I have my mind going in two things at once, and there was no way around it.
Yeah, and the brain fog post-COVID is quite common. I know a lot of people that have been dealing with that.
Yeah.
Um,
The thing is, I'm trying to get back on track with my music making. Like right now, I've been updating things on my Google Sites blog with my Industry Week 2022 highlights, which is nearly finished. So I'm trying to rejuvenate myself and get back on track to where I started from.
Again, it's about, we've talked about, self-care and what are you doing for yourself? What are you doing to show some compassion to yourself, as well as
I feel like a professional. I feel like an expert and a soloist in between.
Mhm. So, and what are you doing for your own self-care? What are you doing to show some compassion to yourself when you feel stressed and anxious?
I want to do some breathing exercises because it's the useful thing that I want to do.
And yeah, and sometimes even talking about it with peers and friends, the brain fog's horrible because I had that as well. And that is, sometimes we just need to wait for it to pass. I couldn't make it go away any quicker.
A mental block for me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't even thinking straight about whether I want to make music or I don't. It's either a lot of times it all revolves around the maths subject as well. Because while I'm making music, I am trying to get my GCSE maths qualification.
So you're doing a lot.
Yeah.
But in answer to your question, I'm just thinking about a client I'm working with in therapy who came to me with exactly the same dilemma. He wasn't finishing things. He was getting stuck finishing things. And what really came up, this may or may not resonate with you, but what came up after a while working together was that it wasn't that he wasn't capable. It wasn't that he didn't have the time even necessarily. It's because he knew that if he actually finished it, that he would have to present himself to others and then be judged somehow. And it was his fear of being judged on the finished article that was keeping him from finishing it. So in his case, it was as long as it's not finished, and he didn't own this, but subconsciously it was, as long as it's not finished, I don't have to play it to anybody. So I'm not exposing myself and I'm not showing my vulnerability. And there is a vulnerability in finishing music and knowing, well, this is it, it's finished now. You're showing vulnerability. You're showing something of yourself, and that can be quite challenging.
Yeah, it's weird because obviously new audience. Knowing that obviously try and that's normal.
Please.
I find it easy to do stuff when I'm outside. Again, similar kind of goes ties with that. But it's like, yeah, again, I have a block.
Yes, because you're moving, like life is movement and energy. I get my best ideas on the dance floor, which I'm sure a lot of you probably resonate with. I don't get my best ideas when I'm sat at a chair. I'll often go out and walk and dictate things. You know, if you're doing an essay, I hate sitting at my desk. Or, so yeah, I think going out, and that's part of the self-care, the creative self-care. There's a book I love called The Artist's Way, and she's like, everyone should go out on an artistic date with themselves once a month, where you just go out and do something with yourself for fun that's creative. And I think that's where all the good ideas come from. So anytime anyone's got a block, get up and get out and move.
It's that, and
It
also I
helps.
think that, you know, it's about boundaries and disciplines when you're at home as well, because there's so much distraction there, or there can be, whether it's the fridge, the TV, the cat, Facebook, whatever, the phone. You know, it's like there's a million things that can take you away from what you're trying to focus on.
So I feel like, especially, I'm sure to be a few in here, bedroom producers, but a separate room. I think that's one of the most important. But a separate room where that's the case. Fine when you're thinking multiple things.
Mhm.
Extra,
Yeah.
Mhm. Any more for any more?
recommend like but before I did this before, I was really interested in what again with the you know, I can't do this. I just gave up and I literally failed the class. I just gave up. I was like, I'm not doing this. What would you say like it's something to like does that help your career going forward? Like would you recommend doing that like actually you know like say even if it was in 20 years from you, like would you recommend going and doing a psychotherapy thing and learning and like helping others do that? Take work like doing that.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, I'm more curious why you gave up.
It's too much. I was like, there's so much information.
Mm. I mean, I can share, you're asking if maybe in 20 years you should revisit it. I mean, I can share my experience, which is that 20 years ago, if someone was to suggest to me that I go and do a degree in psychotherapy, I'd think that they were crazy, and that it was like the furthest thing from like any thought that I'd ever had in my entire life. But here I am today, you know, and you know what's interesting about that direction is that it is about helping others, but really it's about wanting to know more about yourself, wanting to know about why you are the way you are, what makes you do the things you do, what makes you tick, and gaining a deeper understanding, you know, and you know, it sounds like you want to do that, so I would recommend you know, follow that.
Yeah, I think the music therapy is great because you can express so much bypassing the mind. Music, as you guys know, is another language, and you can express so much that you don't have words for. And yeah, it's been powerful for you in a lot of different ways.
Any more questions to finish off?
I could answer those, but I'm going to do it. So I'll ask you later. I'll go for it.
Okay, great stuff. Well, a massive thanks to Belinda and Matthew for the session.